The pull of the church. Why logic can't save you. John Henry Newman was arguably the most brilliant intellectual in Victorian England. He possessed a mind that could dismantle any theological opponent with surgical precision, a mind trained in the finest halls of Oxford, a mind that thrived on rigorous historical analysis and airtight logical deductions. And yet, when he finally made the most consequential decision of his life, a decision that shocked a nation and severed him from his closest friends and colleagues, he did not do so because he finally solved a mathematical equation of logic. He did not cross the Tiber and come home to the Catholic Church because someone handed him a flawless syllogism. He did it because he looked into the mirror of history and recognized something terrifying and beautiful. He spent years studying the ancient theological battles of the 5th century, specifically the obscure and highly technical disputes of the Monophysites. And as he stared at those ancient heretics who had separated themselves from the center of Christian unity, he felt a cold shudder. He wrote that he saw his own face in that mirror. He realized that the Church of the Via Media, his beloved Anglicanism, was in the exact same position as the dissidents of antiquity, while Rome was where Rome had always been. All his erudite arguments, all his brilliant tracts, all his defenses of a middle way, suddenly dissolved not under the weight of a better argument, but under the blinding light of a profound recognition. Truth is not only something you argue, it is something you recognize. We place a massive premium on argumentation in our modern discourse. We treat the human mind as a courtroom where facts are presented, cross-examinations are conducted, and a final verdict is rendered based purely on the preponderance of evidence. We operate under the delusion that if we simply read enough books, listen to enough debates, map out enough logical premises, we will eventually arrive at the bedrock of reality. But anyone who has lived long enough knows that human beings are rarely persuaded by logic alone. You can lay out a flawless historical timeline, you can parse the Greek and Hebrew texts until your eyes water, you can dismantle every single objection a person holds, leaving them intellectually cornered with no rational escape route, and they will still walk away unconvinced. Words can be resisted, logic can be sidestepped. The human ego is a master escapologist. If it wants to avoid submitting to a truth, it will always find a trapdoor, a minor discrepancy, a reason to delay judgment until more data is collected. There is, however, a deeper knowing. There is a kind of apprehension that does not merely pass through the analytical filters of the frontal lobe, but settles heavily into the soul and simply refuses to leave. It is the kind of truth that bypasses our defenses. When you encounter this kind of truth, you do not feel as though you are analyzing an object under a microscope. You feel as though the object is analyzing you. You feel known by it. It possesses an authority that does not ask for your permission to exist. Newman experienced this. Countless others throughout history have experienced this. They reach a point where the endless cycle of point and counterpoint begins to feel hollow, where the relentless demand for more evidence reveals itself as a mere stalling tactic, a way to keep reality at a safe, theoretical distance. When we speak of the truth of the Christian faith, and specifically the visible historical reality of the Catholic Church, we are not speaking of a mere philosophy. We are not speaking of a scattered set of private interpretations drifting casually from person to person down the centuries. We are speaking of a living body. To engage with this reality is not like engaging with the works of Plato or the ethical maxims of Marcus Aurelius. You can argue with Plato, you can adopt 3 of his ideas and discard the rest, but you cannot do that with a living body. A living body demands a relationship, it demands recognition. The early Christians did not gather around a text alone, dissecting it like modern academics in a seminar room. They gathered around the apostles, they gathered around the breaking of the bread, they gathered around a structured, visible community that spoke with authority because it carried the voice of Christ himself. This distinction changes everything. If religion is just a set of ideas, then you are the sovereign judge of those ideas. You sit on the throne, and the various doctrines of the world audition for your approval. But if religion is a historical intervention, if it is a living institution founded by the incarnate Word, then you are not the judge. You are the subject. The truth does not wait for you to validate it. It calls to you, it summons you. And the recognition of that summons is the beginning of the end of your autonomy. Let us trace the genealogy of this living body to see exactly what those early believers were experiencing. We must discard the prevalent modern myth that the early Christian movement was a loose egalitarian collective of spiritual free agents who simply loved Jesus and read their Bibles in the woods. That is an anachronism. It is a projection of 19th century revivalism onto the gritty, dangerous reality of the first century Roman Empire. If you want to know what the early church actually looked like, you do not need to guess. You can listen to the voices of the men who were there, the men who shed their blood for it. Consider Ignatius of Antioch. The year is roughly 110. We are separated from the crucifixion of Jesus by only a single human lifetime. The Apostle John has only recently died. Ignatius is the second bishop of Antioch, a major metropolitan center of the ancient world. He has been arrested by imperial authorities. He is condemned to die in the Colosseum, torn apart by wild beasts for the entertainment of the Roman mob. He is chained to a squad of 10 Roman soldiers, whom he vividly describes as 10 leopards, who only grow crueler the more he tries to appease them. They are marching him overland, through the dust and heat of Asia Minor, heading toward the port of Troas, where he will be placed on a ship bound for Italy. During this agonizing march, Ignatius manages to write 7 short letters to various Christian communities along the route. These documents are not polished theological treatises written in the quiet comfort of a monastic library. They are breathless, urgent, passionate pleas written by a man who knows he is walking toward a gruesome death. And what does this man standing on the precipice of eternity write about? Does he tell the Christians to simply look within themselves and find their own personal truth? Does he tell them that as long as they hold Jesus in their hearts, structure and hierarchy do not matter? He writes the exact opposite. He writes with fierce, uncompromising clarity about a church that is already deeply structured, already visibly unified, and already intensely sacramental. He uses the phrase Catholic Church for the first time in recorded history. He pleads with the believers to do nothing apart from the bishop. He tells them that where the bishop is, there let the people be, just as where Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church. He warns them against schismatics and heretics who are attempting to fracture the unity of the community. For Ignatius, the church is not an abstract spiritual concept. It is a concrete reality made up of bishops, presbyteries, and deacons. It has borders, it has an inside and an outside. This historical reality shatters the narrative that the hierarchical church was a late corruption, a political invention created by Emperor Constantine centuries later. Ignatius proves that the visible authoritative structure was there from the very beginning. It was the air the early Christians breathed. They understood that Christ did not just leave behind a message, he left behind a kingdom. When we read the letters of Ignatius, we are forced to confront a profound question. Are we practicing the same religion as this man who went joyfully to the lions? Would Ignatius recognize our modern, individualized, anti-institutional spirituality as the faith he died for? He writes to the Romans, begging them not to interfere with his martyrdom, declaring that he wants to be ground like wheat by the teeth of the wild beasts, so that he may become the pure bread of Christ. His entire worldview is permeated by the physical, visible, tangible reality of the church. The faith was never a private affair. It was a public loyalty to a public institution, an institution that carried the very authority of heaven on earth. This brings us to the technical mechanics of why this visible structure was so necessary, and why the early Christians insisted upon it with such ferocity. It revolves around the concept of sacramentality. The source text notes that men did not gather around a text alone, they gathered around the breaking of the bread. This is not merely a historical observation, it is a deep theological mechanism. We must understand the specific heresy that Ignatius of Antioch was fighting as he marched toward Rome. He was battling the Docetists. The Docetists were deeply influenced by a pervasive philosophical dualism that viewed the material world as corrupt, dirty, and evil, while viewing the spiritual realm as pure and good. Therefore, the Docetists argued that God could not possibly have taken on real, physical human flesh. Flesh is messy, flesh bleeds, flesh dies. They claimed that Jesus only appeared to be human, a kind of divine phantom or hologram walking the earth. Ignatius saw this as a lethal threat to the entire Christian gospel. If Jesus did not have real flesh, then he did not truly die. And if he did not truly die, then death is not defeated. And how does Ignatius combat this heresy? He does not just quote scripture because the New Testament canon was not even officially codified yet. He points to the altar. He points to the Eucharist. He writes that the Docetists abstain from the Eucharist and from prayer because they refuse to confess that the Eucharist is the flesh of our Savior Jesus Christ, which suffered for our sins and which the Father raised up. This is the mechanical engine of Catholic theology. The Incarnation, the Word becoming flesh, was not a temporary event that ended at the Ascension. It is extended through time via the sacramental life of the Church. We are physical creatures. We are not floating brains or disembodied spirits. We learn through touch, taste, sight, and sound. God, being the architect of human nature, interacts with us according to our nature. He uses the material world, water, oil, bread, wine, the laying on of human hands to communicate divine life. The Church is visible because human beings are visible. The authority is hierarchical and physical because we need an objective reference point outside of our own subjective feelings. If truth is only mediated internally, through personal whispers in the heart, then every man becomes his own ultimate authority. My inner whisper might contradict your inner whisper, and we have no way to resolve the conflict other than the exertion of power. The visible structure, the apostolic succession, the breaking of the bread under the authority of the bishop, these are the guardrails of reality. They prevent the faith from vaporizing into a mist of pious sentiments. They anchor the divine revelation in the mud and dust of human history. The truth does not just hover in the realm of ideas. It lands on an altar. It can be tasted, it can be consumed. But here we must confront the shadow side, the dark and unsettling underbelly of this deeply physical historical theology. The source text speaks of centuries of scandal and sanctity, betrayal and heroism, weakness and glory. If we are going to claim that this visible institution carries the voice of Christ, we cannot look away from the staggering moral failures of the men who have led it. We must look directly at the corruption, the greed, the horrific abuses of power, the popes who bought their offices with gold, the prelates who lived like debauched princes, the devastating modern scandals that have broken the hearts of millions. How do we reconcile this? How can anyone look at the deeply flawed, sometimes wicked history of the Catholic hierarchy and still believe that this is the vessel of divine truth? This is the primary reason why words can be resisted and logic can be sidestepped. The resistance is not always intellectual. Often it is a profound moral and aesthetic recoil. People look at the Church and see a deeply human, deeply broken bureaucracy, and their souls cry out for something pure, something pristine, something untainted by the filth of human ambition. This desire for a pure Church is completely understandable, but it is ultimately a rejection of the agonizing paradox of the Incarnation itself. Christ did not entrust his gospel to angels made of glowing light. He entrusted it to men. He chose Peter, a man who would publicly deny him 3 times to save his own skin. He chose Judas, a man who would sell him to executioners for a handful of silver. The weakness and the betrayal were built into the foundation from the very beginning. The survival of the Church through centuries of internal rot and external persecution is not proof of the moral superiority of its leaders. It is proof of the exact opposite. It is proof that the institution is held together by something entirely outside of itself. As the writer Hilaire Belloc once observed, the Catholic Church is an institution run with such knavish imbecility that if it were not the work of God, it would not have lasted a fortnight. The fact that the doctrinal core of the faith, the sacraments, the ancient creeds, the apostolic succession, has endured intact through the Renaissance popes and the Borgias, is a terrifying testament to a divine protective mechanism. Christ does not abandon what he builds. The vessel is made of cracked, dirty clay, but the treasure inside remains pure. This is deeply frustrating to the human mind. We want the messengers to be as flawless as the message, but God seems to delight in using broken instruments so that the power might be seen to belong to him and not to us. The shadow side of the Church is vast, but it does not negate the reality of the structure. It merely forces us to place our trust in the architect rather than the bricklayers. Let us deepen this historical lens and draw a vivid analogy. Think of a massive ancient ship navigating across a violent, endless ocean. The sea represents the chaotic currents of history, the rise and fall of empires, the shifting winds of cultural philosophy, the relentless storms of heresy and division. For a passenger on this ship, the journey is often miserable, the deck is slippery, the sailors are frequently drunk, the captains have sometimes been corrupt, and the food is hard. If you look only at the crew, you might be tempted to throw yourself overboard and try to swim on your own, or build a tiny, pristine life raft where you can be your own captain. But the ship possesses one singular, undeniable advantage over the life rafts. It has an anchor, and it has an unbreakable keel that was laid down by the original builder. This is precisely the argument made by Irenaeus of Lyon in the late 2nd century. Irenaeus was a disciple of Polycarp, who in turn was a disciple of John the Apostle. Irenaeus is the last living link to the apostolic age. He is bishop in the Rhone Valley in modern-day France, and he is watching a massive storm batter the ship of the church. The storm is Gnosticism. The Gnostics were elitists who claimed to possess secret hidden knowledge. They claimed that Jesus had whispered hidden truths to a select few, and only the enlightened initiates could access this spiritual reality. They were the ultimate purveyors of a subjective, invisible religion. Irenaeus recognized that if the Gnostics won, Christianity would dissolve into a million conflicting cults of personality. So he wrote a massive, sprawling work called Against Heresies. And his primary weapon against the Gnostics was not just a battle of biblical interpretation. It was the visible, public, historical continuity of the ship. Irenaeus pointed to the succession of bishops. He argued that the apostles did not teach secret doctrines in dark rooms. They preached publicly, and they appointed public successors. And those successors appointed successors, all the way down to his present day. It was a verifiable chain of custody. And because it would be too tedious to list the successions of every single local church, Irenaeus pointed to one specific towering reference point. He pointed to Rome. He wrote that it is a matter of necessity that every church should agree with this church, on account of its preeminent authority founded and organized at Rome by the two most glorious apostles, Peter and Paul. This is not a medieval invention. This is a man writing in the year 180, pointing to the Bishop of Rome as the living, unifying center of the universal faith. He is pointing to the anchor. When the winds of Gnosticism tried to blow the believers off course, Irenaeus told them to look at Rome, to look at the visible continuity that has never truly been broken. The ship is battered, the hull is scarred, but it is the same ship, and none of the little life rafts, no matter how clean they appear, can survive the centuries of open ocean. When we understand this historical gravity, we begin to see the cultural ripple effect of how deeply our modern world has deviated from this understanding of truth. The source text accurately observes that the enemy would love nothing more than to keep you circling, forever analyzing, forever debating, never surrendering. This is the exact spiritual sickness of our age. We have built an entire digital culture around endless, frictionless circling. We have podcasts, forums, subreddits, and video channels dedicated entirely to religious debate. A person can spend 10 years of their life consuming theological arguments, reading apologetics, listening to brilliant debates between atheists and believers, Protestants and Catholics, skeptics and mystics. We gather data endlessly. We treat the search for truth as a permanent lifestyle brand, rather than a journey with an actual destination. This endless analysis creates a powerful illusion of progress. Because we are reading and arguing, we feel like we are doing something noble. We feel like we are seekers. But in reality, we are often just avoiding the terrifying moment of decision. As long as truth stays theoretical, it never becomes transformational. As long as we are still weighing the evidence, we retain our independence. We don't have to change our lives. We don't have to submit our wills. We don't have to kneel. We get to remain the aloof, objective observers of the universe, sitting in the balcony, critiquing the performance on the stage. But the Catholic claim refuses to let you stay in the balcony. It forces you onto the stage. It says, here is a historical institution that claims to be the mystical body of Christ. It traces its lineage back to the fishermen of Galilee. It offers you the actual flesh and blood of the creator of the universe. If this claim is false, it is a blasphemous monstrosity that should be violently opposed. But if it is true, it demands the absolute surrender of your entire life. There is no comfortable middle ground. The modern seeker is exhausted. The cultural ripple effect of infinite choice is infinite anxiety. When you have to invent your own theology every single morning, when you have to be your own pope, your own council, your own magisterium, the burden of truth becomes crushing. The constant negotiation with reality wears down the soul. We are drowning in information, yet starving for authority. We are desperate for a voice that cuts through the noise of our own internal monologues and speaks with the heavy, undeniable weight of reality. This brings us to the actual mechanics of resistance and the phenomenology of that quiet, almost unsettling moment when the debate finally begins to fade. The text notes that there comes a moment when objections begin to feel thinner, not because they have all been perfectly answered, but because they no longer satisfy. This is a profound psychological insight. When a person is fighting against the pull of Rome, they construct massive walls of intellectual objections. They bring up the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Galileo affair, the complex dogmas of Marian devotion, the intricacies of justification. They build a fortress of arguments to keep the living body at a distance. And for a long time, these arguments feel strong. They feel like righteous armor. But truth does not coerce. It does not smash the walls down with a battering ram of logical proofs. It calls. It exerts a quiet, relentless gravitational pull. And eventually, the person inside the fortress begins to realize that they are starving. The arguments are still there. The historical complexities are still unresolved. But they suddenly seem beside the point. The resistance starts to feel less like strength and more like distance. It feels like holding your breath. You can hold your breath for a long time if you have strong lungs and a stubborn will. But eventually, the sheer biological necessity of oxygen will overwhelm your resistance. The tension you feel, that pull you try to ignore, is not random. It is the recognition of a home you did not know you had. The objections grow thin because you realize that you are demanding a mathematical certainty that history cannot provide while ignoring the massive living reality standing right in front of you. You realize that your refusal to submit is no longer driven by a pure love of truth, but by a fear of losing control. Surrendering to the church feels like a defeat. It is a defeat. It is the defeat of the ego. It is the agonizing realization that your private judgment is not the supreme arbiter of the universe. When the debate fades, something deeper rises. It is a terrifying vulnerability. You are stepping out of the fortress of your own mind and walking into a massive, echoing cathedral built by centuries of saints and sinners, a place where you are no longer the architect, but merely a worshiper. Let us look at the genealogy of those who have actually walked this path, those who have felt the debate fade and chose to step into the cathedral. The history of conversion to the Catholic Church is a history of brilliant, stubborn minds finally collapsing under the weight of this beautiful gravity. Think of G.K. Chesterton, the towering literary giant of the early 20th century, a man who loved a good argument more than almost anything. He spent years defending Christian orthodoxy from a distance, writing brilliant essays, fighting intellectual battles in Fleet Street pubs. But eventually, he realized that standing on the porch was not the same as entering the house. He realized that to truly fight the madness of the modern world, he needed the solid, unyielding ground of the ancient church. He described conversion not as a sudden flash of emotional lightning, but as the slow, steady discovery of a continent. You argue against it, you test it, you kick the walls, and eventually you realize the walls are stronger than your boots. Think again of Newman. The cost of his conversion was astronomical. He lost his position at Oxford, a place he loved with a fierce devotion. He lost the respect of his peers. Many of his lifelong friends refused to speak to him ever again. He stepped out of the refined, respectable world of Anglican establishment and joined a church that was, at the time in England, deeply unpopular, largely poor, and socially marginalized. Why would a man do that? Why would a man burn his own life to the ground? Because of the voice. The same voice that called fishermen from their nets, that broke bread with sinners, that looked into the eyes of doubters and loved them anyway. Peter and Andrew were not sitting on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, carefully reading theological scrolls and debating the finer points of prophetic fulfillment when Jesus walked by. They were pulling wet, heavy nets out of the water. The smell of fish and brine was in the air. Jesus spoke, and the authority of his voice bypassed their analytical defenses. They recognized the voice of the shepherd. Newman heard that same voice echoing through the writings of the early church fathers. He heard it in Ignatius. He heard it in Irenaeus. He heard it vibrating through the ancient councils. The voice was alive. It was not a dead echo trapped in a historical document. It was speaking through the living magisterium of the Catholic Church. And when you finally recognize that voice, you understand that all the years of arguing and resisting were just a preparation. It was never about winning arguments. It was always about coming home. But we must not romanticize this coming home. We must examine the shadow side of this surrender, because as the text warns, it is not easy and it is not comfortable. To come home to Rome is to embrace a deeply frustrating reality. It requires you to submit your mind and your will to an institution that moves at a glacial pace, an institution that speaks in ancient formulas, an institution filled with ordinary, annoying, deeply flawed human beings. You will sit in pews next to people who sing off-key. You will listen to homilies that might be poorly delivered. You will encounter bureaucratic friction that will test your patience. You will have to defend doctrines that the modern world finds abhorrent and incomprehensible. This is the grit and friction of the real. Modern individualism trains us to curate our own realities. We customize our news feeds, our entertainment, our social circles, and our spiritualities. If a church no longer serves our needs, we simply drive down the street and find another one that aligns better with our current preferences. We remain the consumer. The church remains the product. But the Catholic Church cannot be consumed. It consumes you. Kneeling before a priest in a confessional, speaking your darkest sins aloud to another human being who sits there in the person of Christ, is the ultimate anti-modern act. It is a violent blow to the modern ego. Trusting that a piece of unleavened bread is the creator of the universe requires a suspension of empirical pride that is agonizing to the modern mind. This is why those who know, those who truly feel the weight and beauty of this truth, eventually stop negotiating. Negotiation implies that you are on equal footing with the opposing party. You do not negotiate with the ocean. You do not negotiate with the mountain. You either climb it or you walk away. To trust the church is to accept that there is a truth larger than your capacity to fully comprehend it. It is to accept that you are a child receiving an inheritance, not a judge evaluating a contract. The comfort of the Catholic Church is not the comfort of a soft pillow. It is the comfort of a solid rock. It is hard, it is unyielding, but it will not wash away when the storm hits. When we step back and view this vast landscape, the tension between arguing and recognizing resolves itself. Arguments are the scaffolding we use to build a path to the front door of the cathedral. They are necessary, they are good. We must read, we must study, we must engage the mind fully because the God who gave us reason expects us to use it. But the scaffolding is not the building. Once you reach the door, the scaffolding has done its job. You cannot live on the scaffolding forever. There comes that quiet, unsettling moment when you realize the door is open. The voice from inside is calling your name. The resistance you feel is just the dying gasp of your own autonomy. You are tired of circling. You are tired of the endless analysis. You want the real thing, the bread, the wine, the unbroken chain of hands laying on heads all the way back to Galilee. You want the wild, scandalous, glorious reality of the incarnation extended through time. Truth does not coerce. It will let you stand outside the door forever if you choose. But it is meant to be entered. It is meant to be lived. And when you finally let go of the need to manage your own spiritual universe, when you allow yourself to be gathered into the ancient living continuity of the faith, you will find a peace that the endless debates could never provide. You will stop negotiating, you will kneel, you will trust. This is a heavy thing to carry alone. The journey toward this kind of surrender is rarely walked in total isolation. If this exploration of the ancient living truth resonates with you, if it puts words to a tension you have been carrying in your own mind, do not keep it to yourself. Pass this episode along to someone else who is tired of circling, someone who loves truth enough to follow it all the way to the end. Send it to someone who is ready to come home. May the peace of Christ be upon you.